Hello, I'm trying to beat the clock and put on my glasses. Happy Saturday and welcome to All the Things. I am Monique Duson.
And I'm Krista Bontrager, also known as Theology Mom.
This is true. This is the show where we talk about all the things related to God, the Bible, and real life. We are glad to have you with us this evening.
And also glad to have the one and only Bob Bontrager helping us out behind the scenes and doing his thing. Thank you so much. Also, our moderators tonight are Sylvia and Haley. Awesome. Let's see if they're there. They are. And Elaine Voss is there too.
Well, hello.
Welcome to everyone. So let us know that you're watching. We know a lot of our normal listeners are probably at the Women in Apologetics conference tonight.
That's happening right down the street from where we are in Anaheim.
Yep. But we are live tonight, so please do let us know in the chat that you are watching. It's going to be a great show, and you will definitely want to be interacting with us with your questions as we go along.
Yeah, make sure to like the show, share the show, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, hit that subscribe button. And tonight's show itself is brought to you by the Center for Biblical Unity.
And Impact 360, the Theology Mom podcast.
Center for Biblical Unity.
Yeah.
I don't know what else it was. I missed one.
You said it twice.
Oh, I
that's
did?
okay.
Okay. Well,
that's all right.
You know, Family 210 Clothing and others.
Yeah. But tonight we have a special fundraiser for the month of June.
Yes.
We're trying to raise a little bit of money here for marketing for our upcoming book. So you can be part of that. Now, this special t-shirt design of the promise of God's rainbow and the Noahic covenant is only available during the month of June. So you will definitely want to go check that out. So it's real easy. You can either go to the homepage, centerforbiblicalunity.com, and you'll see the shirt right on the homepage with the link, or you can go to customink.com/fundraising
That's
CFBU.
complicated.
I know. That's why I said just go to
CFBU. Go to the centerforbiblicalunity.com and click on the merch page.
Yeah. No, not on the merch page. On the homepage.
On the homepage.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. On the homepage. Yes.
There'll be a big link to it and you can check it out. So it's a print on demand. So you will get it when I close the fundraiser. So you will get it at the end of the month. But it's an awesome way to help support the ministry and to support our work with our upcoming book. In fact, maybe we should give everyone an update about the book.
Sure. We have officially finished the book. We have sent it to the publisher. And so now we are waiting for edits to return and we will enter into the editing process. But yeah,
we're
in
the edit
along.
And design phase.
Edit and design. We have a cover and all of that. So we're moving along.
That's right. What else have you been up to?
I feel like nothing. That's just it. Writing. I don't know. What have you been up to?
Doing a lot of podcasts. I had 3 podcasts this week. I've been doing a short series on Roman Catholicism on my Theology Mom stream. I did a 2-part series on Roman Catholicism, trying to help people think through that issue, and that got a lot of positive feedback about that. And then I did a special edition of the show of my Theology Mom podcast in honor of the Women in Apologetics Conference. And I did some reflections on my 30 years of working in theology and apologetics, and some of my reflections as a female working in a male-dominated field, and some thoughts about the way forward. And then I also, for the family meeting on Thursday, I did a teaching on the Human Rights Campaign Index and why all of these businesses are queering themselves.
Yeah, so check it out. Check it out. You can check it out on our YouTube page. And you can just look it up on YouTube at Center for Biblical Unity in case you're not on it right now. People have taken the month of June off. Let's just be honest. Yes, I don't have any travel this month. This is the one month of the year where I do not have any travel. And I said, bless the Lord, oh my soul. And so, yes, I'll do the family meeting. But aside from that, I'm writing or getting caught up on things that I literally haven't been able to do since we've been in our book project. But yes, I'll come back around, people. I'm coming for you in July.
All right, so let's talk about our show for tonight. We've got our friend, Dr. Harold Felder, back. He actually joined us exactly 2 years ago. This month was the first time that we had him on the show. We had it on for our Juneteenth episode then, too. So maybe talk to us a little bit about just kind of the topic tonight and give us a little setup as to what we're going to be talking about.
Yes. So I reached out to Dr. Felder. Gosh, it's been some months now because I was reading and researching a lot about the Black church and this idea that Christianity tends to be the white man's religion. It's the religion of the oppressors and things like that. And in my research, what I came across was an entire document of information that led to Christianity in Africa, which I knew Christianity had been in Africa before the slave trade, but I didn't connect the dots that many of, or I'll say a percentage of the slaves that came over from Africa actually had, an understanding of Christianity. And so in looking at this document and the books that were linked on this document, I asked Dr. Felder, have you heard of this? That some of the slaves, African slaves that would have come over actually had, some Christian understanding or heritage to them. And so that led him on a whole research project of his own, from what I understand. And so I'm super glad to be able to have this conversation because I think that many of the just regular everyday people who don't read or write about this would say, well, Blacks or, the African descendants of slaves all came into contact with Christianity through the lineage of the slaves, and slaves received it once they got to the New World.
Then I think that
isn't actually correct.
And that kind of feeds into the idea of Christianity as a white man's religion. The only reason that the descendants of slaves or slaves themselves became Christians was because it was forced on them because of slavery. And so your question was, wait a minute, had Christianity reached all the way into Central and even Western
like
Africa,
Ghana and things like that, or the Congo. I knew, we know about Egypt and we know about, that northeastern African component. Yeah. But I did more research and looked at where Christianity had spread, and I was just very surprised to see, how far into Africa Christianity was at the time of slavery's beginning, especially the transatlantic slave trade. So yes, we can get Dr. Felder on and start talking about this.
Yeah. There he is.
Hello. Oh, unmute your mic, if you will, please. Hey.
Here we go.
Now, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's so good to be back here. It's good to see both of you again.
And thank you for joining us. Now, for anyone who is unfamiliar with Dr. Felder, like Krista said, you can go back and become acquainted with him in the longer format by going to our YouTube page and finding our Juneteenth episode from 2021. But tonight, Dr. Felder, would you give us a brief introduction as to who you are and what you do?
Okay, so for ministry-wise, I actually, I don't want to go too far back because I'm in the interest of time, but I was an atheist who was a software engineer at NASA, became a Christian, started studying apologetics, actually moved to Charlotte, North Carolina to pursue a master's degree in apologetics, got my master's degree in apologetics, went back for a doctorate of ministry in apologetics, trying to figure out what to work on, for my dissertation, went to a Juneteenth celebration and saw a picture that sort of changed everything for my ministry. And it was a picture of a Black baby being fed by a large spoon. The spoon was being held by a white hand, and in the spoon were a Bible, the cross, and change. And I knew that that was not true. So that's when I decided for my dissertation to write my book, The African American Guide to the Bible. And I've sort of been on this quest ever since. I thought it was going to be a one-time thing, but I just keep going deeper and deeper. And then, I think I've exhausted what I want to study, and then something will come up like you, Monique, you emailing me saying, "Hey, were some of those people who came to America Christian already?" I'm thinking to myself, that's a very interesting question, considering that Christianity had never left Africa. So it made sense that that would be the case. So I started doing research, and like usually, I was surprised at the stuff that I found.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight. And when you were last here, we discussed a lot related to slavery in the Bible. And today we're going to still be talking about slavery, but more in the American context. So I think that, I alluded to this in the opening, that there is this stereotype that Christianity is a white man's religion, that Black Africans who came here, they came, with their local religions, African spiritualism, and that is really what it means to be a native African, and that Christianity was something that was given to slaves to make them obey, essentially. Maybe give us a little thumbnail of the objection and a little bit about how you go about answering that objection.
Well, first is the belief in there that Christianity is the white man's religion. And I hear that a lot, but the problem with that is it's simply not true. Christianity has never been the white man's religion. If we look at when Christianity started, it started at Pentecost, soon after the resurrection of Jesus. Keep in mind that at Pentecost, there were Jews from all over the world. There were Jews from Africa. There were Jews from the Middle East. There were Jews from Asia. There were Jews from everywhere in the known world at that time. Out of these Jews who were there was the first church. When Peter preached his first sermon, 3,000 came to the Lord. That was the beginning of the church. And part of that 3,000 were people who were from all over the known world, Jews from all over the known world. So in the first day of Christianity, there were Africans as part of Christianity. But not only that, if we read a little bit further, we find that the first Gentile, meaning the first non-Jewish convert to Christianity, was actually the Ethiopian eunuch who came to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. He was trying to understand the scriptures. God actually performed a miracle on the apostle Philip to transport him there to explain to the Ethiopian eunuch what he was reading. The Ethiopian eunuch understood, asked Philip to baptize him. He became baptized. He became a believer. He took his belief back to Queen Candace, who was his queen, which is, we say Ethiopia, but it was actually the kingdom of Cush. At this point, it was called, people call it Ethiopia, but it was what we would call modern day Southern Egypt, Sudan, and Southern Egypt, Sudan. What is the other one right next to Sudan? Ethiopia. So Queen Candace accepted Christianity, and the empire accepted Christianity, and Christianity started to grow. And by the 4th century, Christianity, much of Africa was Christian. And, and I guess I'll go a little bit into more definition later on. But the point being that from day one, Christianity had Africans in it. So Christianity was an African religion then. And also keep in mind, well, Christianity never disappeared from Africa. Today, Christianity is rampant in Africa. As a matter of fact, there are more Christians living in Africa today than any other continent. And it is projected by 2050, there will be more Christians in Africa than Latin America and Europe combined. And even in Asia, I mean, Asia Christianity is growing rapidly. There have been estimates that there are 200 million Christians in China alone. So the idea that Christianity is the white man's religion is simply false.
That's good. And I just want to point out, like, if people have their Bibles, like, just go to Pentecost, go to Acts chapter 2. You're going to see right there, like Dr. Felder said, you know, that it says that some of the Jews that were there that day on Pentecost were from Egypt and parts of Libya, which is North Africa, belonging to Cyrene. So we have, you know, it is from the beginning, we see Africans there at the very foundation of the church. And so this is a very important part of our making our case that Christianity is not the white man's religion. So very helpful going through the early church. Some of the early church fathers were from North Africa. We've covered that in the past on previous shows, gone into detail on those things, but so that's a good thumbnail of the case.
So Christianity, we see entering into like the northeastern region of Africa. I think by we see Mark where's Mark in Egypt?
Yeah.
And with the Coptic church and things like that. Are there other apostles that go into the North African region or even deeper into Africa?
I'm not familiar with other apostles going in there, but Christianity grew as a result of Apostle Paul. I mean, Apostle. I'm sorry, of
Mark.
Mark. He's credited with being the apostle to Africa, and there may have been others, but he's the one that's accredited with being the apostle to that region.
What other religions would have potentially been? I'm sure there would have been like each tribe's own specific religion, but were there other religions as well, maybe from outside of the continent?
So you mean outside of Africa that were not indigenous to Africa?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, not like tribal, you know, this tribe has their own like religious practice. Were there other bigger religions that came into play on the continent too?
Yeah. So a lot of Africa was Christianized, but over time that sort of waned because of the influence of Islam. Because Islam became very influential because a lot of the traders were Muslims. So a lot of the Africans did gravitate toward Islam. So Islam did have took a foothold into Africa, and it has a foothold today as well, as well as Christianity does. So those are the two main religions that have come to Africa. As you mentioned, there are indigenous religions. You know, we had animism, of course, which is the belief that there is a spirit in everything that lives. You know, the tree has a spirit, the rocks have a spirit, and it's sort of a difficult existence because you're trying to please all of these different spirits, you know. And then there's ancestor worship, because that's the belief that those who go on have influence over your life, so you need to appease them. So you're trying to appease all the spirits in the earth, and you're trying to appease your ancestors, and that could become difficult. And some of the tribes actually had polytheism, where they believed that there were a multiple or multiplex of gods. And then there were tribes that had a combination of those, like for instance the Fon people, which sort of turned into the Dahomey kingdom. Mm-hmm. Their religion was a mixture of animism, ancestor worship, but they also did a lot of sacrifices, human sacrifices. Their gods were pretty bloodthirsty. They would have festivals every year where they would decapitate 500 people. And in some years, they would decapitate thousands. And these were people who were taking the slaves from other tribes. They would, instead of selling them as slaves, they would just use them as human sacrifices. So, yeah, Africa has seen some a difference, a plethora of religions.
I'm glad I'm on this side.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so let me ask a little clarifying question there. Like, do you have any sense of the spread of Christianity into Africa prior to Islam coming into Africa? Like, what was the scope of the spread of Christianity into the continent?
Well, yeah, Christianity, for instance, like the Akumsa kingdom around 400, 4th century, that's present day Ethiopia. They became Christians, and then right after them, after a couple of centuries, we had the Nobadia, the Bukharia, Lydia. They also were, these were all Nubian kingdoms. These were all around where Ethiopia is at, where Sudan is at. These all turned Christian. And all up and down the Nile during the 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries, even before and after the Arab conquest, there were Christian kingdoms in Nubia that added to the Christian kingdoms that were already there, such as, already there as part of Ethiopia and Sudan as well. So Christianity penetrated deep into Africa. It wasn't just relegated to the northern part of Africa. It went deep into the heart of Africa.
Mm.
So when does Islam come into Africa? What are roughly those dates that Islam starts spreading into Africa?
Not sure. I think maybe around 700 AD.
That's
yeah. That is when it started to. Is when it became, we're going to take over the world type of stuff, and of course Africa would be part of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Go ahead.
So then we see it going south, Christianity going south, and we, from that, especially that northeastern region, do we also see it spreading west?
It spread throughout much of Africa, and it sort of spread out west also because if we look at, for instance, nations like Congo, they were Central Africa and West Africa, because it was a huge region. You have Benin, which is an Africa that was also Christian. You had Gambia, so you did have Christianity spread all over all the various parts of Africa. It was at some point or another, most of Africa was Christianized.
Do we know by what century or like what year Christianity would have spread and started spreading west into maybe that Congo, Benin area?
Well, initially, I'm not sure of initially. We don't have dates for the initially. However, we do know. So what happened is that over time, even though much of Africa was Christian, over time it did wane in certain parts of in sort of parts of Africa. So then, after that happened, then a new wave of missionaries came from Europe, particularly Portugal and Spain, and they brought Christianity to places like the Congo, and so they brought the gospel to places like the Congo and some of those places that were Christians before but had no longer become Christians. But what's interesting is that the Christianity that came to them from Europe was the same Christianity that was exported by Africa centuries later, because Christianity was actually exported from Africa originally to Europe. Africa was the hotbed of intellectual thought, of what doctrines were formulated. It was the Christian incubator. Then during persecutions, a lot of those people, a lot of those theologians, a lot of those Christians fled to Europe, and once they fled to Europe, then there was a vacuum left in Africa. So some of those places reverted back to their traditional religions, but over time, then some of those European missionaries came to Africa to bring the gospel that was once in Africa, but had lost, but had gone because of some of these regions returning back to their animism or traditional religions.
Okay.
No, this is just really interesting. This is like all new for me, so I'm just trying to process, what he's saying. So, I think that I want maybe we can get into, I don't know, where do you want to go next?
I think it's interesting that part of when you look at history and you look at the slave trade and all of that, the idea of Christianity having once been in Africa and then Christianity being, I won't say overrun by Islam, or people converting to Islam, or Christianity waning and going back to tribal religions. Part of the slave trade initially was seen as being opportunities for mission. And so you would get people from Europe coming into, like from England, coming into the African continent, taking slaves. You would get people from the Americas coming in and taking slaves, but they were doing so under this guise of mission work and evangelism, trying to, Christianize the continent and things like that, without some of the understanding that Christianity had been in Africa for centuries and actually went from Africa into Europe. And so there is this whole time period where you get this lull in African Christianity, so to speak, and then it picks back up again. I think partly as some of the true missionaries would go from like England and evangelize the continent, but I think what we see more than anything is this surge of Islam and people returning to some of their tribal traditions.
Yeah, I did want to mention this though, because we're talking about Christianity and slavery, but keep in mind that slavery existed in Africa long before the white man came.
100%.
Yeah, but not only that, as far as the Atlantic slave trade, as far as the slave trade to Europe and Middle East, the Muslims were doing it before the Europeans got there. Mm-hmm. So the Muslims had actually showed them the way. So the Europeans were didn't want to be undone. They came and they sort of did it at a higher scale, but they learned it from the Muslims, who were the first ones to do it.
And I believe that they actually continue to do it even after, the quote unquote white man had stopped doing it. So I think it's
doing it today.
Yeah, it's really interesting to dig into the history of Christianity and to think about, what are we told in some of our theology classes, like things that I've been told, like what are we believing and what do we understand about the growth of Christianity and how people have understood Christianity around the world, not just in our American context. Because once we get out of our American context and understand Christianity in other nations, we can see, this is how Christianity has impacted, the rest of the world, or this is where and when Christianity came to this region. So we can ask better questions.
Yeah, that's good. All right, we're going to take a quick break and hear from our friends at Impact 360. Then we're going to come back, start taking your questions, and continue the conversation about American slavery and Christianity and go a little deeper into that. So sit tight, and here is our friends at Impact 360.
I'd always heard in church, go and make disciples, and they'd always say that verse, and I'm like, I don't really know what that looks like at all. And then when I got here, they taught me everything I was curious to know about, progressive Christianity and how to talk to an atheist and how to go about witnessing to someone without it being overly preachy or insincere, and that helped me so much.
It's just been such an awesome week. going through these questions and really diving into them, and not just with me, but other Christians. It's not like an individual thing, it's a together thing. We're really strengthening our relationship with the Lord personally, but also together.
We have been given the greatest gift. We have been given life, and Propel has really made me realize once again how important it is to share that gift with the millions of people out there who don't have that gift that's just ripe for the taking.
All right. Once again, those are our friends at Impact 360. They have summer camps. They still are taking registrations for Propel as far as we know, but you can also check out their other programs there, their gap year program, and what they are up to see if it'll be a good fit for your family to help in the discipleship and worldview training for your children.
We'll be speaking there in July.
Yes, we will. All right, let's do a couple questions.
Let's
shall we?
go.
All right, Dr. Felder, there's a question from Melissa, who's a newer listener. She says, can you expound more?
I know she a newer listener.
She said it earlier in the
Okay, I didn't
chat.
know. Hi, Melissa.
Can you expound on it more about Muslims taking slaves? This is new to her.
I didn't realize this.
I didn't realize this. So maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Muslims were, and this is one of the things that sort of frustrates me about when we always hear about Christianity supposedly being the white man's religion and Christianity being anti-Black people, but Muslims took slaves for, like I said before, the European missionaries arrived there.
Before and after.
What's that?
I said before and after.
Yes. Now, we always hear about the Atlantic slave trade, where there were slaves put on ships sent across the Atlantic. But what we don't hear about is the slave trade that the Muslims had, where they would take slaves and they would march them across the Sahara Desert. And by some accounts, 1 and 2 of them died along the way. There were just as many, as not more, Christians died going to Muslim countries than died going across the Middle Passage. And that's what we don't hear about a lot.
Yeah, we talked a bit about that last time, too, in your first appearance on the show. So, Melissa, that might be a good follow-up to this conversation, is to go back and hear our discussion about slavery with Dr. Felder from 2 years ago. I guess
I was going to say, sorry, if you were to take, and I mean, you can literally just Google map of like Muslim slave trade.
Yeah.
And what you'll see is that if you were to, go basically from the top of the Horn of Africa and kind of split it across, they would literally march people through a lot of Africa into, the more Muslim territories of the Middle East. But not only there's also routes that led into other places in Europe and things like that. Yeah, I'm going looking at the wrong camera. That routes that led into Europe by sea and things like that as well. And the Muslim slave trade, and not that you can compare, gruesomeness to gruesomeness, but the Muslim slave trade killed many more Africans than the transatlantic slave trade. Am I saying that to say the transatlantic slave, it's not that bad? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not trying to minimize it.
Yeah.
But we also need to keep in perspective the fact that, one, Christianity itself as a religion did not invent slavery. Christianity as a religion does not condone slavery. I would not say that just because some Christians may have upheld slavery and participated in that our religion itself condones those things. I think that also should be threaded through a little bit more.
But I also want to point out that I believe Christianity is what ended slavery.
Go ahead and preach.
And here's my point. Like we mentioned before, I touched on slavery has always existed. It has existed since the beginning of mankind. It is a stronger nation overtaking a weaker nation. It's always existed, it's existed in Europe, it's existed in Africa, it's existed in Asia, it's existed in the Americas before the first white man came here. Like I said, it has always existed. But what hasn't existed is something weird happened. in the 1700s, the abolitionist movement. Now, at the heart of the abolitionist movement was this idea that man was made in the image of God, that man had value because he was man. It started with the Quakers, who were the first ones to outlaw having slaves. So this idea caught on, this idea that man is more than just whatever we decide that man is, that there's something inherently spiritual about man, that man has some type of worth that we can't take away from another human being. So this is what actually grew the abolitionist movement, and the abolitionist movement is what actually fostered the end of slavery as we know it around the world. And to be honest with you, we really want to go there.
I'm here for it. Let's go.
To be honest with you, if it were not for the colonialists, because the colonialists were the ones, the British and stuff was the ones who, started the abolitionist movement, because they had colonies in Africa. When they shut down slavery in Britain, they also shut down slavery in Africa. So slavery would probably still be going on in Africa if it were not for these countries becoming colonies that were under sort of the well, maybe not control, but influence of Britain. So the idea that Christianity is a slave religion is sort of the opposite of what it was. If it wasn't for Christianity, we borrow from Christian ideas all the time, and we don't even realize this idea that man is made in the image of God. This idea that man is spiritual. This idea that man has work beyond what people give it. This is a uniquely Christian idea. You don't find this idea in Islam. You don't find this idea in atheism, that man is somehow above all of creation, that man is made in the image of someone who's the creator of the universe. But only in Christianity do we have that. And when Christians who were involved in the slave trade started to realize this, they started to realize that slavery itself was wrong, not just for me, but for everyone. To the point where the British Navy used their naval authority to capture ships, to sink ships. They brought in other nations who also did the same thing. They patrolled off the coast of Africa and took ships that were involved in the slave trade. They overthrew African kings who would not give up the slave trade, because there were a lot of African kings who did not want to give up the slave trade. They were deeply invested in the slave trade. So this idea of Christianity is the idea that truly set the captives free, spiritually and physically.
Let me fan you. Go ahead. I don't even know what that was, but I'm gonna fan you for real. You're about to make me do a shout up in here. All I need is an organ. Come on, won't he do it? Yes. But that's so good. But what is, and to your point, what's frustrating is when we only hear one side of this conversation, especially in this current race-focused narrative of, is Christianity the white man's religion? Should we be ashamed of Christianity? Are we, participating in the religion of our oppressors and things like that? No, I'm not. Because the religion of those who upheld slavery, especially those who use things like the slave Bible and twisted the scriptures to be able to support slavery, I would argue we're not participating in true Christianity.
Right.
So, but yeah, so that's a good word. You better go ahead. Okay, let's get back.
All right, so I'm going to go to Elaine's question next. Dr. Felder, she asks, so did victims of the transatlantic slave trade already, in some cases, have a Christian faith? So did they come to America as slaves, but maybe they had already either adopted the faith or were familiar with Christianity before they even came to America?
That's a very good question. And the answer is yes. So think about it. I talked about the fact that Christianity came to Africa soon after Pentecost, and that it grew in Africa and it never disappeared from Africa. There were places it disappeared from, but it never completely disappeared from Africa. And I also talked about the fact that around the 1400s, we did have Portugal and Spain come as missionaries to certain parts of Africa, and they brought the same gospel that was exported to them centuries ago. So a lot of these nations then became Christian. And one of the main ones I want to mention is Congo. The Congo nation became Christian around the 1500s. They were Christian during the entire time of the slave trade. And King Alfonso was baptized Alfonso.
His name was Alfonso? You better quit playing. They had Alfonso way back then.
Alfonso, not Alfonso.
Oh, okay.
Not Alfonso.
I was like, Alfonso might be my great uncle. But okay, never mind.
But yeah, so and he was one of the first ones. He was Christian, and he was Christian throughout the entire slave trade. So keep in mind that not only were they Christian, but they also evangelized those around them. Mm-hmm. And we do know that the Congo were exporting Christians, and we know this for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is because we actually have a letter from the governor of one of the ports in Colombia, who was writing to the King of Spain complaining that these slaves were coming in with Black Christians from the Congo, because the Spanish didn't want Christian slaves, but the Congo didn't care. They sent Christian slaves everywhere. The Congo, they enslaved a lot of their own. Like if there was a thriving slave trade after a while, and if there was on one occasion that there weren't enough slaves, and the king sent 300 or 400 of his wives to be slaves. If you were one of his tributary villages and you didn't pay tribute, okay, you would become slaves. If he didn't like you, you become slaves. If you were his wife that got on his nerve, you become slaves. If you were a neighboring nation, you become slaves. Even one of the ones that they led to Christianity. So we do know that, but we also know through some scholars as well, and like Cecile Froment, and she talks about, she's an art historian, PhD at Yale University, and she talks about how like a lot of the slaves who went to the Americas were already Christians. And she talks about the art in Brazil. There was art in Brazil that actually shows some of the saints, and it was African art that was taken from, it was Congolese art, but they made it in Brazil, so you could see the Christian influence. Then we also had the Angola, Church of Angola, because Christianity had penetrated that far. Now Angola, now this is very interesting. Angola would actually, before they would send off slaves, they made sure that they were Christian. They would baptize them before they sent them off. Now, this was the Catholic Church. As far as they were concerned, they baptized you were Christian. So in their mind, all these slaves that they sent out were Christian. But here's one I have for you that you probably never thought about. You probably never heard about. Have you heard about the Mandingo warriors? And if this name rings a bell, it's because Kunta Kinte was a Mandingo warrior.
Yes.
If you ever watch the movie Roots and you watch the beginning of the movie, you see how Kunta Kinte was kidnapped by white men. All right. Well, first of all, that didn't happen. The only people who kidnapped slaves were the Portuguese. That was only in the 400s. In the 400s, and that didn't last for long because they realized that they didn't have to, because they just buy them from the African chiefs. And Robert's going into the interior of the country, and people get malaria. They had a high mortality rate, so they stopped doing that real quick. So the Mandingo warriors they were one of the main middlemen doing the slave trades. They were the ones who were kidnapping their fellow Africans, and they would intentionally go to Central Africa. They would kidnap slaves, and they would bring them back to the coast to be shipped off to the Americas. And what's interesting about the Mandingos is that they only captured those who were non-Muslim. So they would target Christians and those who followed the traditional religions as those who would be slaves. So considering these three things alone, there were other nations also that were involved in slavery that were Christian. But just considering these three, I would say a significant portion of slaves who came to the Americas were Christians or familiar with Christianity.
Yes. In what I read, there were, what I've been reading, there were definitely more Muslims that were sent over from some regions, but that there's a sizable amount. From what I find, the statistics vary. Some people are as little as, 20%. Some are 35%. What during the slave trade time to the Americas would have had some kind of touch with Christianity, or would have been, confessing Christians who understood the faith. But it really depended on a lot of the region that they came from, and who evangelized their community. Yes.
Absolutely.
Wow, I have so many questions.
Well, go ahead.
I mean, okay, first of all, this idea that it was Black Africans who were kind of capturing and kidnapping each other, maybe rival tribes or whatever, and then selling them to slave traders. I guess the argument could be, well, they were just fulfilling the market demands of white people, and white people are still responsible for all the slavery in Africa, because if they hadn't shown up, they wouldn't, the Africans wouldn't have been incentivized to kidnap one another and throw them and to sell them to white people. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
No, I definitely have.
Okay, go ahead. You get it, and I'm gonna come in next. Go ahead.
Okay.
You know, tag team.
I mean, have you heard?
Again.
Is this an objection? I'm
Go ahead.
Okay, so keep in mind now that, like I said, that they were slaves. They were taking each other as slaves long before the white man. I will make the point that slavery saved some of their lives. And here's why I say that. Because before the white man came, that when one nation overtook another nation, they would generally kill the men and take the women as slaves. As a matter of fact, when the British approached the homie and said, we want to do away with slavery. We want you to do away with slavery. And his response to him was, then if that is the case, when I take my neighbors, I will kill them. If I can't sell them, then I will kill them. So I could also make the argument that a number of people were saved because of slavery. Now, you're right.
Yeah, these are very controversial claims.
Right.
I mean, people be coming for us with this.
Right.
All right.
But that is the case. You're right. It did increase the market, but it also saved some because there were slaves who were taken, depending on what time of year you were taken, you may or may not be killed. If you were taken by a rival African tribe during harvest time, they would allow you to live so that you can work their plantations. If they took you after that time, then the chances are they would kill you because they had no use for you, and there was no reason why they would want to feed you, and because you're mostly dead weight. So,
did you want to respond to the?
I would say that slavery was happening in Africa before white people got there. And so to say that white people just increased the market value or kept the market value going, slavery would have continued whether white people arrived or not. I think white people going allowed for slavery to spread to lands where it might not have been, but we also can appreciate the fact that it was a lot of white abolitionists who then came into Africa and also said, no, these people have equal dignity, value, and worth. And in our faith, we do not own people. And so I think that some people can put that argument forward and say, well, white people allowed for this to happen and things like that, but it was already happening. And it was already happening in mass amounts. Early on, Dr. Felder mentioned the Doheny tribe. And I think they're featured in that movie Woman King, maybe.
Yeah,
But they were brutal. But they sold people, and they have this whole way of being, but that was before white people got there. And so there was a lot. You can go down into southern Africa and see the war crimes and the slavery and things like that happened on the continent without the influence of white people. You just need human hearts that are kind of sinful and colluding together. And if I collude to try to conquer you and then take you and make you my subject, that's the nature of our sinful heart and how we are bent on conquering and subduing. And I don't know that that's too far out from what, I mean, it's the sinful impact or the sinful aspect of it. But in Genesis 1 or 2, God instructs man and woman to go out and to subdue. And so I think what happens is that we get this sinful component to it. We get this post-fall state where now the command from Genesis to go out and to subdue and to bring all things under now includes humans because I'm sinful. It wasn't meant to include humans.
And also keep in mind what I said before, also the fact that because of the abolitionist movement and because some of these nations were subjects to these European powers, slavery was ended in Africa for the most part. I mean, there's still some places in some Muslim parts of Africa right now where they take Christian slaves. Mm-hmm. But so we talk about the negative influence of colonization, but we also need to talk about the positive, because if it wasn't for that, then slavery would still exist, because it was because these nations were under the colonial rule that they were able to stop slavery in these nations in Africa as well. So we have to keep that in mind as well.
Okay, so now I have another question, because I hear a frequent concern. I'd love to have both of you weigh in on this. That, well, if it hadn't been for slavery, the descendants of slaves wouldn't have abandoned their native tribal religions, and that there is this renewal movement calling the descendants of slaves back into African spiritualism. And in my theological opinion, which is just really witchcraft and something that the Bible strongly condemns, but that is seen as to be a real, authentic descendant of a slave. You ought to return to the religion of your ancestors. You ought to return to African spiritualism. I'm wondering if I'd love to hear both of you guys weigh in on that.
Okay, so here's my point. My point is that, like, for instance, Thomas Oden, in his book, How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind, Rediscovering the African Seabed of Western Christianity, he makes the point that Christianity is a traditional African religion. Mm-hmm. Christianity was in Africa before Islam came to Africa. So a lot of Africa, like we just made the point, a lot of these Christians who left Africa left as Christians. So, and I think the only reason we're hearing this is because of this still deep belief that somehow Christianity is a white man's religion. So going back to traditional religions is somehow getting back to your Black roots. But I thought we dispelled that Christianity is not the white man's religion. Christianity is part of your African roots. So what are you trying to get back to?
I would say the same. That
have you heard this objection?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That you need to leave the colonized church and go back to your African roots and go back to African spiritualism and all of that. I think it's a conversation of providence. So when we think of slavery and we think of those who, the African descendants of slaves who may have received Christianity or learned Christianity through like word of mouth tradition from other slaves and things like that. Is that not part of God's providential design? Because African spiritualism is not going to get me to heaven. You know what I mean? Like, there's only one way and you must worship the correct God. And so if I was a part of African spiritualism, as an African back in, the home country, and I came here as a slave, and I learned about the true faith of Jesus, I would say that is providence to some degree. I have to look at God's providential design, and I think that that's a hard word for people. I think somebody would say, so now you think, slavery was providential. Well, we have to remember that we don't settle in these temporary moments. In these temporary moments here on earth, we are going to have hardship, and there will be blessing and everything in between. But what is it all pointing toward? What should my goal be? My goal should be where my soul will rest. And so I kind of tend to look at it as providence as well, and want to enter that part of the conversation into things, so that it's not like, this religion was forced on me. If you understood what you received, you would say that it was part of God's grace and providence.
Right. And I would like to add to that as well, is that, so this idea that going back to your traditional religions is something we should do because they are African. Well, all religions can't be true. Just because they were the religions that your ancestors used or worshiped doesn't mean it was right. Doesn't mean it was true. So this going back to something just for the sense of going back to it makes absolutely no sense. I'm a Christian because it's true, because it's rooted in truth, not because my ancestors did it. I was an atheist for a lot of my life. So, I investigated the Nation of Islam and all that. I'm a Christian because it's true, not because of what somebody else did in my past.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And you guys are just touching on so many, I think, important objections related to slavery. I think that it's an emotional subject, and I think that makes it difficult to talk about sometimes. And again, we don't want to minimize the cruelty and horror of human slavery, but at the same time, we also want to acknowledge slavery is happening right now as we are doing this show. We have not stamped it out. We've stamped it out in some places, and there's more work to do. And there was slavery before the transatlantic slavery, because, as we said earlier, it's part of the human condition. It's a sad part of how we inappropriately, I think, God appointed us to govern and to rule and reign over the creation, and in our sinfulness, we try to rule and reign over each other, and do it, in a very wicked way at times. So this is good stuff. Maybe talk to us a little bit about resources. I know you mentioned Dr. Oden's book is a great resource. What are some of the resources that you've used in your research that you could maybe point people to who are wanting to do more digging on this topic?
Well, of course, the African American Guide to the Bible, shameless plug, is a great resource for you as well. I actually wrote an article called Is Christianity a White Man's Religion? It's on ratiochristi.org. I go into a lot of stuff there. Elizabeth, I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing her last name. Elizabeth Isiche wrote a book called A History of Christianity in Africa. I think that's also a good resource. And I guess I also mentioned Thomas C. Oden. Thomas Sowell is what actually got me in this, reading some of his material. Thomas Sowell, Sowell. So those are all good resources to you want to further this. Now, I did have a book that I read called the hold on, let me see. The Slave Trade, but this is by Hugh Thomas, but it is a beast of a book. It is not for the faint of heart, but if you really wanted to go deep into it, knock yourself out.
Wow. It looks like it's 800 pages or more.
It is.
Wow. Well, very good. This has been very helpful, and I think that you're giving us a lot of things to think about. And there was a question, and I don't know if you want to comment on it. I'm going to try to see if I can find it back here. There's one more question. earlier, this is with Jenny's question, Bob. You'll have to scroll up a little bit. Earlier, you made the claim where she was wanting to follow up. Where in Europe did Christianity start taking hold?
So when
it would seem it would start in Eastern Europe if it came from the Middle East, but it would start more in the Central or the West if it came from Africa. So talk to us a little bit more about that interchange between Europe and Africa early in Christianity.
Yeah, well, also when Constantine started looking at Christianity, and he wanted his clergy to learn more about Christianity, they got their theologians from Africa. And so that's how some of them did. Now, some of the ones that left Africa, as far as doing the persecutions, doing Nero, they were just all over the place. There was no, to my knowledge, just no one particular place where they went. They just scattered across the region.
All right. Well, hopefully that helps, Jenny. Hopefully we addressed your question. There's also some great comments in there about Constantine as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Felder.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been great. So everyone go check out Dr. Felder's book, The African American Guide to the Bible. It's a wonderful book, really addresses a lot of the key objections that come up when it comes to talking to your African American friends about the faith. The whole first half, though, really can't be missed, because that's where Dr. Felder is establishing that Christianity is true, which is the point that he was making earlier, is that is really the most important issue, is it true? And then the second half of the book is addressing a lot of these common objections. So
Auntie Linda's in the chat. She said, yes, his book is so great.
yeah, she was in your book group when we did it about the book group. Yeah. So all right. Well, thank you so much. I know it's late there. Thanks for staying up.
Well, thanks again for having me.
All
We
right.
appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right. Yes. And also thank you, Sylvia, for putting that in the chat. Dr. Felder's booklet that he did for our friends at Ratio Christi. Yes. On Is Christianity the White Man's Religion? All right.
Such a wealth of information.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, all right. So we got one more short thing. We've had a couple of people write into the ministry with a question about a bill in the state of California. There's a story on the Fox News website about whether or not the state of California is going
hell in a handbasket? Hopefully.
going to criminalize parents for refusing gender affirming care.
I guess the answer would
So
just playing.
our state here in the great state of California is continuing its incremental approach toward normalization and that
This
sort of a
is
thing.
so. I am sorry. This we just got to call a spade a spade. This is just demonic. Like
Yeah.
it is sinful. It is demonic. It is not just a slight attempt, but a straight out just I feel like our government is standing in the face of parents and saying, I wish you would. It's kind of like, and you probably never had a fight, but if you was ever on a fight, you like in the playground and being like, I wish you would. Like, I feel like that's what our government is saying to parents. Like, I wish you would try to raise your kid. I wish you would try to have a value that's outside of ours, and we will show you what we will do. Like this bill, it goes into, maybe, I don't know if you want to put it up so we can look at it.
Yeah. So Bob's I did the deeper dive. I found the bill on the California legislature website. So we want to notice a few things. Bob, can you scroll up just a hair here on this? Right there. So it was introduced February 14th. It was amended in the Assembly, which is, again, California only, on March 13th. And then this past week, it was amended in the Senate. So we're going to scroll down here and just show you the relevant part. Bob, look for the blue lettering a little bit. Yeah, so this bill, for purposes of this provision, would include a parent's affirmation of the child's identity as part of health, safety, and welfare of the child. So they're redefining what that phrase means of health, safety, and welfare. So scroll down a little bit more. And there we go, section 1. So what this is specifically about, as far as we can understand it, again, we're not attorneys, but as far as we can understand it, it's looking at child custody battles. So when you're deciding where to place a child and how parents will share custody, one of the redefinitions of one of the criteria that's being considered is health, safety, and welfare of the child. Now that's being redefined to include a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity.
Yeah, so it used to be, do we have eggs? Do we have milk? Does the child have a bed? Or, is there no bed and the child needs to sleep on the floor? Are there screens on the windows? Who's coming in and out of the house? Are there drugs in the house? Does the child have access to clean water? Things that normal people would be like, yes, we need to consider these things when looking at where a child is going to be placed, especially when we're looking at custodial issues. Courts generally tend to favor the mother. And so, I don't even want to say 9 times out of 10, but a large percentage of times in custody battles, custody hearings, if it's going to be a split, it's going to be 49, 51% of the time it's going to be with the mother. But that could shift, and not shift like, oh, well, the mother can't actually provide for the child, but the mother doesn't affirm, the gender affirming care that the child may want. Or the father may be ill-suited to raise this child, but the father does affirm gender, affirming care. There is a reason, I believe, in reading the bill that there could potentially be higher interest given to the placement with the father who may not be in the best interest of the child. Now, will people always say, and proponents of this bill say, we always want to make sure that the child's best interests are upheld? Sure, they're going to say that, but what's being considered in the best interests? Well, now it's gender affirming care. So it's more than just the meat and potatoes on the table, the roof over the head, the clean water. Are you affirming of the gender? So if all things are equal, the parent who affirms the gender ideology most likely would be given some kind of preference.
And I think that the rejoinder that you're going to hear when you talk to people is that, it's just one of the criteria. It's not the whole criteria. And so that's going to be what's coming forward. Our question is should it be a criteria at all?
Yeah.
But I think the other question that people are raising is how far behind is it going to be that the custody issue could be framed as child abuse? That if one of the parents isn't affirming of the child's gender, or you have one parent that's really pushing that on the child and another parent who's trying to resist that, would the parent that's resisting it be seen as withholding safety or harming the child's health because of the emotional blackmail that they're putting parents through with saying that, if you don't affirm these things, then the child will kill themselves. Well, no parent wants their child to kill themselves. But the question is this opening a door then for some parents to be, the non-affirming parent, to be accused of child abuse or neglect?
Yeah. And I think California has already set or established some of that precedent in a bill that they passed last year. It's SB, is it 106? Where children fleeing from parents in other states that, say, hey, we're not going to support your gender transition or gender affirming care. Well, those minors can come to California and find refuge here. And so I'm not really sure what to say about our government at this point.
Well, I think this is really what we have to get clear about as Christians, and hopefully you're doing this in your conversations with your Christian friends, is to help them understand that this is now a state-sanctioned religion, and that we have a different worldview, and take them back to Genesis, chapter 1. We're just talking about slavery earlier, and the dignity, value, and worth of all humans. That's founded in Genesis 1. But male and female is also founded in Genesis 1. And we have to understand that this is a worldview issue. And so this is when people come to us and say, well, I don't want to talk about politics. I just want to vote. I don't think voting has anything to do with my faith. It's just, that's politics. I don't want to talk about politics. I want to keep politics out of the church. Well, here's my problem with that, is we're in a moment, we're not in the neutral, kind of more culturally neutral moments that we were in prior to 2015 and the passage of what some people call gay marriage. We're in a moment now where we can't just go talk over coffee with someone and, we're going to kind of come to an understanding and tolerance. And that's not the moment we're living in. We're living in a moment where there is quickly becoming a state-sanctioned religion that no one is allowed to question. And we are definitely entering into, a posture of being a religious minority.
I would say to find out more information about what she's talking about, check out the family meeting from this week, where she definitely talks about why are all of these things being pushed and how does the UN come into play with that, and different things like that. But we don't have time to get into that tonight. But look at the family meeting from this week and you will see a lot of that history. But yes, I definitely think that parents are, if you haven't already reconsidered and you're living in California, reconsidered your educational options. I would say now is definitely the time. Washington just passed, and Elaine put this in the comments, but yes, like Washington recently passed a very similar bill into law. So in California, it is not law yet. Our governor has not signed off on it. It's passed the House and it's passed the Senate. In Washington, they actually made it law, I believe, at the end of May, sometime in May, they made it into law. And so we are, waiting to see if it will actually be signed into law. That this idea of health, safety, and welfare must also include gender affirming care, and a parent's affirmation of their child's transition and trans ideology.
So Melissa's new to the program. She's asking, what's the family meeting?
Oh, Melissa, come hang out. So the family meeting happens every Thursday that we're in town. And it's really just a chance for all of us to get online and hang out, and we have prayer requests and people put questions in, and we'll talk about something that's like culturally relevant that week that's happening, or we'll, maybe just I just hop on and I'm like, what we gonna talk about? Krista has a whole spreadsheet and all kind of stuff. So depending on who you get, you're gonna get something very, very different. But it's just our time to hang out. It's kind of like a cousin's reunion once a week when we're in town.
Yeah, and we kind of often look at current events of that week, what's silliness on Twitter that we might comment on from a worldview perspective. Have you seen this in Twitter about race? Have you seen this or that about queer issues? And we just comment on it and try to help. We try to make it somewhat equipping too as we do that. But that's the family meeting. It's on Thursdays. And if you can't tune in live, it's available on podcast or on replay on YouTube, Facebook and YouTube. All right.
Family update time.
Yep.
Yes. And Elaine says, if you're lucky, you get Sassy Mo, my favorite. There's Petty Mo and Sassy Mo and
Holy Mo.
We trying to increase Holy Mo's time. Holy Mo's a struggle. My goodness. Okay, you guys. Well, thank you for being with us tonight. It's been a joy to have the opportunity to be with you. Please check out the Center for Biblical Unity online. Sign up for our weekly digital newsletter. We don't spam you and stuff like that. We send you one newsletter a week that kind of recaps the things that we've talked about this week, including this episode. And so with that, is there anything
And
else?
make sure that you know that the newsletter is the one and only way to stay in touch with us, because we know that because of the nature of many of the topics that we talk about, we may not be on social media for that much longer. So if you want to stay connected to us, only 2% of you are seeing our content anyways on social media. Only 2% of our followers actually see our content. So it's very important, whenever you do see it, go interact with it, comment, like, and all of that. But getting the weekly digital newsletter is the only way to stay in touch with us that is reliable, and we'll stay connected as a family. Also, don't forget our shirt fundraiser this month, our Promise shirt, and we're celebrating Noah Covenant Month here at the Center for Biblical Unity. And for $30, you can help us raise support for marketing for our upcoming book. And with that, we're out.
Bye. There's nothing left.